I never asked for this assignment. When the Select High Command ordered me to observe the primitive human species during their inevitable annihilation at Kepler 7, I assumed it would be an amusing diversion. The Hive Swarm was already inbound, and no species, not even our most vicious predators, survived their consumption. My job was to watch, record the humans' behavior, file a report about their soft skins, their emotional instability, and their laughable combat instincts. Simple, clean, professional, or so I thought. I was leaning against the viewport of the Silent Fawn, my flagship, sipping nutrient gel and watching the binary stars of Kepler 7 swirl lazily outside, when my comms officer chirped up, "Commander, we're detecting distress signals. Multiple ships broadcasting to anyone within range." "Of course you are," I muttered. "The humans are being eaten alive, as expected. Mark it down." Screaming commenced at 0800 standard. Then she added the part that caught my attention. "They're human ships, but they're fighting." I stopped mid-sip. "I beg your pardon?" "Fighting, sir." Rather aggressively. I flicked my tail, rolled my eyes, and strode over to the main display. Sure enough, the scanner showed a cluster of small, primitive craft, human colony ships flanked by a trio of what passed for their military vessels, engaged with no fewer than 20 Hive warships. That's 20 against 15 human ships, and the humans were not running. Now, let me explain something. The Select don't exactly revere the Hive Swarm, but we respect their efficiency. The Hive doesn't kill you in the sense of war. No, they digest you, body and mind, weaving you into their grotesque machine consciousness. No species in our recorded history has ever resisted them. Ever. So, of course, my first assumption was that the humans were flailing in panic. An instinctive last stand. A brief flurry of defiance before extinction. That's what every species does, right before they're disassembled like a meat puzzle. Except, they were winning. Well, let me clarify. They were still losing horrifically, but in a way that looked like winning if you squinted hard enough. Their tactics were chaotic. Insane. They flew straight at the Hive cruisers, tiny, flaming, half-shattered hulls bashing against enemies 10 times their size. I swear one of their fighters rammed an escort and ignited its engine compartment. On purpose. What are they doing? I asked no one in particular. That formation makes no tactical sense. My weapons officer, who still spoke in the deferential tone of someone who hadn't yet figured out I was already halfway to open-mouthed awe, offered meekly. "They appear to be shielding their colony ships." I blinked. "You mean they're defending their civilians? Instead of retreating?" "Yes, sir." I barked a laugh. "Oh, adorable. That's very, very human of them." But I couldn't look away. I ordered the Silent Fawn closer, maintaining stealth. Couldn't have the Hive noticing me yet. Wouldn't want to ruin the show. On the viewport, the human military ships had formed what can only be described as a line of complete and utter idiocy, pinning themselves directly between the Hive and the massive colony haulers. A defensive wall of flying scrap metal and human spite. Predictably, one of their warships exploded after sustaining about 30 seconds of concentrated Hive fire. Pieces of it scattered across the void, spinning through my viewport like confetti. I thought that would be the end of it. But the 2 remaining ships didn't break formation. They moved closer together, plugging the gap. Still firing. Still alive. They do know they're going to die, right? I asked. The comms officer made a soft, clicking noise. "It seems so, Commander." And then it got worse. Or better, depending on how you define completely unhinged. One of the human colony ships hailed us. Us. Which was impressive because, technically, we weren't even broadcasting an identity signal. I ordered the message put through. On the screen appeared the most alien thing I've ever seen. A human face. Sweaty, bloody, eyes sharp and steady despite the chaos behind him. "This is Captain Jackson, Corps of the colony ship New Dawn," he said, voice calm and strong. "To whoever's listening, get out of here. Now, the Hive is here. We'll try to buy you time, but we can't stop them." I froze. He wasn't even asking for help. He was warning me. A complete stranger. His screen flickered as another explosion rocked his ship, but he didn't flinch. "We got over 4,000 people on these ships," he added. "Families. Kids. If anyone finds this message, tell them we tried. Tell them we didn't run." Then he cut the transmission. I stood there, staring at the blank screen, tail lashing back and forth. I tried to understand what I'd just seen. This creature, knowing he was doomed, used his last moments of communication to warn me away, to protect me. I shook my head and muttered, "Illogical. Entirely illogical." And then something even more illogical happened. One of their single-seat fighters, already trailing smoke and debris, peeled away from the line and barreled straight at the Hive destroyer closest to me. The pilot's voice crackled over open comms. "This is Lieutenant Kara, SYNN. I'll buy you some time. Get out while you can." Her fighter, a burning coffin of metal and determination, slammed into the Hive ship's weapons bay. The explosion sent a bloom of fire and molten hull spinning into the void. She was gone, but she took half the destroyer with her. I didn't even realize I'd said it out loud. "When the void are you people?" My bridge crew stared at me expectantly. The correct thing to do was to turn around, fly home, report back that the humans fought bravely and died predictably. Write up the usual platitudes about how the galaxy's newest species was too fragile for this cruel universe. But I couldn't stop replaying that pilot's last words, that captain's steady eyes. I stood there for another long moment. Then I straightened my tunic, flicked my claws across the comms console, and growled, "All weapons online. Bring us into firing position." The weapons officer's jaw dropped. "Sir, that's not our mission." I cut him off with a hiss. "Our mission just changed, and that's how it began. I came here to watch the humans die. Instead, I started rooting for them. Because these lunatics, these fragile, illogical, insane creatures, they didn't know how to stop fighting. And for the first time in my career, Vrag feared commander of the Slek observation fleet, felt something I'd never felt before. Terrified. Not for them. For everyone else. By the time I boarded the human colony's ship, charmingly named Hope's Folly because why not, I thought I'd mentally prepared myself. You see, I just watched them throw fighters, warships, and their own lives into the gaping maw of the Hive Swarm with what I assumed was dumb courage, ignorance, or both. Surely, once I got up close, I'd find the cracks, fear, desperation, the inevitable collapse of their strange little psyche. But no, instead, the madness just got worse. We docked with the Hope's Folly under covering fire from what was left of their two remaining military ships. The docking corridor stank of smoke and ozone. As soon as the airlock hissed open, a wave of heat, noise, and something I swear smelled like burnt sugar hit me in the face. The interior was chaos. Shouting voices, clanging tools, sparks flying from torn walls, and everywhere, humans working like possessed animals. I fully expected to find their captain cowering behind a barricade or weeping over a bottle. Instead, a man in a torn, blood-streaked uniform strode up to me, thrust out a hand, and smiled. "Jackson Corps. Thanks for coming, Commander, Vrag, I muttered, eyeing his outstretched hand like it was some kind of weapon. "Commander of the Slek fleet." "Right. Commander ZYR. He grabbed my clawed hand in his soft one and shook it. "You're just in time. We've got wounded piling up and bulkheads on fire, but at least the coffee machine still works." "Oh, good." "They're insane and caffeinated." We walked through the ship's scorched corridors, the metal beneath my boots still warm from plasma fire. Humans ducked and wove around us, carrying tools, carrying wounded, carrying children, in some cases, all three at once. One of my aides finally asked the obvious question. "How many of your people remain?" Kor answered casually, like he was describing the weather. "About 4,000 civilians. Most of them families. Plus 300 crew. As for combat-ready personnel, well," he glanced around with a humorless smile. "You're looking at him." I stopped dead in my tracks. "That's it. You brought 4,000 civilians this deep into contested space, guarded by 3 warships, one of which is already slag?" "We came to build homes," Kor replied evenly, "not to fight wars." I wanted to laugh, but somehow the words caught in my throat. We entered what they called the cargo bay, though it had clearly been repurposed as their command center. Star charts covered every wall. Tables were buried under haphazard piles of weapons, tools, and what appeared to be hastily cooked meals. At least half the humans inside were bleeding, bandaged, or limping, yet everyone still worked with feverish focus. Core pointed to two individuals as we entered. Dr. Lisa Vorn, our chief medic, and that's Chief of Security Bran Tuck. Don't mind the scowl. It's permanent. Bran Tuck, a giant of a human with more scar tissue than face, glanced up from calibrating a rifle just long enough to give me a single curt nod. Then he went right back to work. I couldn't help myself. I blurted out the question nagging at me since docking. Where's your fleet? Core's expression darkened. You're looking at it, he said. In select military doctrine, there is no greater sin than overcommitting to an impossible situation. Retreat and preserve what you can. That's the sensible thing. But these humans, they didn't just stay in the fight. They treated it like some kind of team sport. When I asked Core why they hadn't abandoned their civilians yet, a logical move, at least by select standards, he just stared at me like I was the lunatic. Because those civilians are the mission, he snapped. Yes, of course. Forgive me for assuming you valued survival. Then things somehow got worse. Dr. Vorn, who looked so small and exhausted that I could have carried her in one hand, walked over to me, wiping someone else's blood off her face with the sleeve of her coat. Commander ZYR, she said briskly, your wounded are in Medbay 3. I've already started treating them. That stopped me cold. You're treating my soldiers? She gave me a look of pure exasperation, as though I just asked whether water was wet. They were bleeding, she replied. It's what I do, but they're not your species. I protested. She snorted. So what? They're alive, aren't they? For the first time in my career, Vrak Ziwar, terror of the Andra Nebula, proud child of the Slek Warbrood, was speechless. Meanwhile, Bran Tuck was growling at Core about the Hive Swarm, still tracking them. Doesn't matter, Tuck said, slamming a fresh energy cell into his rifle. We're gonna get him back. Get who back? I asked. He froze, just long enough for me to see the fury bubbling behind his eyes. My brother, he growled. He was on one of the colony's ships they took 2 days ago. I shook my head. Then he's already dead. You know this. Why throw more lives away? Tuck stood up to his full height, towering over me. And I'm not a small creature. Maybe you don't get it, Commander, he said. We don't abandon our people. Not ever. Even her doctor got in on the madness. As we walked toward Medbay 3, Vorn started interrogating me about Slek physiology. How does your circulatory system work? How do your nerves respond to heat damage? Do you metabolize antibiotics? I blinked at her. Why do you care? She kept scribbling in her little notepad, barely even looking up. Because I'm treating your soldiers. I want to get it right. But we're not your people, I said again, still trying to make sense of this bizarre philosophy. That was when she stopped, turned, and stabbed a finger into my chest. You are now. We were interrupted by klaxons. The Hive had found us again. Scout ships were closing in. Core barked orders while humans ran to their battle stations. Bran Tuck loaded weapons with one good arm, the other already in a sling from earlier, while young gunners manned their consoles. I followed them up to the observation deck as the Hive scouts approached. Their weapons were outdated, their shields already flickering. And yet, they stood there, ready to meet the enemy head-on. We're not just fighting for ourselves, Core murmured, almost to himself. I glanced at him. Then who are you fighting for? He turned, locked eyes with me, and said, for everyone who can't. The Hive scouts swooped in, plasma fire lighting up the void. One of the human gunners screamed as his console exploded, burning his arm to the bone. Before he even hit the floor, another human vaulted over the rail to take his place. Vorn was already there, dragging the wounded gunner toward the medics, her coat smoking from where debris had cut through it. Don't stop firing, Tuck bellowed. And they didn't. They fought like demons, like creatures possessed. They weren't fast. They weren't strong. They weren't even particularly skilled. But God's help me, they were relentless. They fought because they believed no one else would. And in that moment, as the human guns blazed defiantly into the darkness, I understood something. It wasn't bravery that made them terrifying. It was that they simply refused to let go. And for the first time, Vrak Zilar, wondered if maybe my people had been wrong about who the apex predators really were. By the time I reached Haven Station, if you can even call that decrepit metal carcass a station. I'd already started to accept two indisputable truths about humans. They're clinically incapable of letting things go. They seem to believe impossible is just another way of saying extra spicy. Haven was nestled in a dense asteroid belt, ostensibly because the rocks made it harder for the Hive to maneuver. Realistically, though, it was just because humans will fight anywhere they can wedge a gun and a grudge. And oh, they were wedging plenty of both here. From orbit, Haven looked like it had already lost. Its plating was dented and scorched, shields flickering in and out like a dying starfish. I counted more hull breaches than intact walls and honestly suspected that one strong sneeze could finish it off. Yet when I stepped onto the command deck, Jackson Core greeted me like it was just another day at the office. "Morning, Commander," he grunted, eyes fixed on the tactical map. "You'll be happy to know we've tripled our firepower since you last saw us." I blinked at the smoldering wreck of a station and arched an eye-ridge. Tripled? How is that possible? We bolted a few mining lasers to the hull. Ah, of course. Silly me. What truly struck me, though, was how calmly they prepared to die. The humans had already done the math. Against the Hive fleet, 300 ships and counting, they stood about as much chance as an ice crystal in a star's core. Their supply of ammunition could last maybe 6 more hours. Their shields probably half that. But none of that seemed to matter. Core's voice carried across the deck, issuing orders as though he was managing a bake sale rather than the final stand of a species. "Get those outer cannons working. Bran, seal deck 7. Doc Vorn, I want medics at every choke point. And someone find me more coffee before I start eating the wiring." Doc Vorn herself, who I was convinced survived entirely on spite and sheer medical audacity, was already elbow-deep in wounded soldiers by the time I checked on her. She had not slept in, judging by the dark circles under her eyes, several human years. Yet she moved from patient to patient like a hurricane, stitching up humans, Sleck, and whatever else was still breathing. "Doctor," I finally said, "you need rest." "Nope," she replied, not even glancing up from the shredded arm she was rebuilding. "You're going to collapse." Then I collapse after everyone else is patched up. Her assistant shot me a look that translated universally to "Welcome to my nightmare." Meanwhile, Bran Tuck, already wounded from the previous engagement, was supervising the armory because apparently humans consider mortal injury and light inconvenience to be synonyms. When I asked how many rounds of ammunition they had left, he grinned through blood-stained teeth. "Doesn't matter. After that we fight with knives. Or rocks. Or whatever's lying around." "Rocks," I repeated flatly. "Damn right. Ever seen a human with a rock? It's art, right? Art." One of the younger soldiers, Danny Foster, I believe, was helping civilians into evacuation pods when I passed him. He looked about 12, 22, apparently, but I don't believe it. Face half-bandaged, arms full of crying children. Core barked at him. "Foster, get on the pod yourself. That's an order." Danny smiled faintly, hugging a little girl before tucking her into a pod. "No can do, sir. My job's to keep these kids safe. I'll stay." I muttered under my breath. "Does your species come with an off switch?" Nobody answered. And then dawn came. Not that dawn meant anything on an asteroid station, but humans seemed to like the symbolism, the beginning of the end. The Hive fleet arrived in full force. Hundreds of dark, spiked vessels moving in eerie silence, like predators circling a wounded prey. Core stood at the viewport with his arms crossed, staring at them like they owed him money. "Well," he said cheerfully, "looks like they brought everybody. Hope they packed lunch." I counted 300 Hive ships. Humans had maybe 30, if you included a few cargo tugs they'd slapped guns onto. Suicide. Total, unambiguous suicide. But when the klaxons started blaring and the Hive opened fire, the humans didn't hesitate. "Fire at will," Core roared. And they did. I will say this much. Humans are loud when they fight. The first wave of Hive drones boarded at Docking Bay 3. I arrived with a squad of Sleck soldiers to find Bran Tuck already there, bellowing orders and firing his rifle one-handed despite his shoulder being half-melted. "Hold the line," he roared. "Don't let him near the civilians. I've fought in 100 wars, and I have never seen anything quite like it. Humans fought even when they had no weapons left. When their rifles ran dry, they used knives. When the knives broke, they threw debris. When their arms failed, they tackled drones with teeth and bare hands. At one point, I saw a Marine grab a broken pipe and beat a Hive drone into the deck while screaming something about his mother. They were fighting with rocks against plasma, and somehow, they held the line. Dr. Vorn ran into the middle of the battle, against all sense, trying to reach wounded soldiers. Core yelled for her to fall back, but she ignored him. When a Hive drone leveled its weapon at her, Brantuck threw himself in front of her without a second thought. Took the plasma bolt full in the chest. Even as he collapsed, he grabbed her sleeve and croaked, "Take care of the others. Don't waste time on me." And then he died. She didn't stop working for a second, tears streaming down her face. She just moved to the next wounded Marine. The battle raged for 4 more hours. Haven's walls shook. Fires broke out everywhere. The Hive kept coming, like an endless ocean of claws and metal. When a final wave hit, Core ordered the last of the civilians off station. He stood by the viewport, watching the escape pods disappear into the void. "Well, Commander," he said, glancing at me with a wry smile. "Guess this is it." I asked what his plan was. "Plan?" He laughed. "We hold the line. That's the plan. Even if it kills you, especially if it kills us." By the time the dust settled, half the station was gone. Hundreds of humans were dead. The rest were bleeding, burnt, barely standing. But the Hive had been stopped, at least for now. And somehow, through sheer grit, they'd bought enough time for every last civilian to escape. Later, I found Danny Foster sitting on the deck, his face burned and his uniform torn. One of the children he'd carried to the pods had left a drawing in his hand, a crude scribble of a stick figure human holding hands with a much larger stick figure alien. I crouched next to him and asked what it meant. He smiled faintly, despite everything, and said, "Means we did our job. Means somebody gets to grow up." So here's what I learned that day. Humans don't fight because it's smart, or because it's easy, or because it guarantees survival. They fight because they refuse not to, even when it means throwing rocks at plasma bolts, even when it means standing on a burning deck with nothing left but each other. They fight because to them, somehow, the lives of strangers matter more than their own. And in that moment, watching these lunatics hurl themselves in a hopeless battle after hopeless battle, something clicked for me. They're not weak because they feel fear. They're terrifying because they don't care. If you told me at the start of this mission that I would one day watch a human volunteer to be slowly butchered alive on camera while their friends cheered them on for doing the right thing, I would have assumed you were hallucinating from oxygen deprivation. Yet here we are, on the bridge of Haven Station, surrounded by the smell of burnt circuits and plasma residue, listening to Dr. Lisa Vorn, a woman I had come to suspect was equal parts medical genius and unmedicated lunatic, calmly explained to her captain that she was volunteering to let the Hive Swarm convert her into one of their machines so the galaxy could watch it happen. It all started, as these things always did with humans, with shouting. The station was quiet for perhaps 3 minutes after the last wave of Hive ships withdrew to regroup. Quiet enough for the humans to catch their breath, patch up their wounded, and run out of coffee again. Then Dr. Vorn marched into the command center with her coat bloodied from yet another marathon triage session and slammed a data tablet on the table. "I have an idea," she announced. Everyone groaned in unison. Jackson Core, who looked about 5 years older than he had when I first met him, just rubbed his temples. "Why do I feel like I'm going to hate this?" "Because you are," she confirmed briskly, tapping the screen. Her idea was horrifying even by my standards, and I'm Sleck. We hatch our young in pools of acid and use the runts for target practice. But Lisa, she wanted to let herself be captured and converted by the Hive Swarm on purpose. Then she'd have the comms officer broadcast it live to every inhabited system in the galaxy, so everyone could see exactly what happened to the Hive's victims. Her logic was, well, it was human logic, which is to say, completely upside down and self-destructive, yet disturbingly persuasive. Most of the galaxy still thinks this is just a human problem, she argued. If they see it happening to one of their own, they'll have no choice but to fight. No one can ignore the truth once they see it. Core stood up so fast his chairs skidded across the floor. Absolutely not. Are you out of your mind? Yes, she said flatly. And yet here we are. Even I had to interject at this point. You understand, I hissed, that the Hive does not simply kill you. It preserves you. You will still be aware while they... Yes, I know, she interrupted. It's part of the plan. I blinked at her. You want to feel it? I want everyone else to see me feel it. There's a difference. That was when Sam, their youngest communications officer, barely old enough to molt if he'd been Sleck, jumped up and volunteered to run the broadcast. I can patch the signal through all the galactic relays, he said, his voice shaking only a little. If I crank the output and use the emergency bands, they can't block it fast enough. Jackson stared at him, aghast. You're just a kid. So are half the people stuck on those colony ships, Sam shot back. Doesn't mean we get to quit. And then Danny Foster limped in. Because of course he did, the boy had more burns than uniform left on him and casually announced he'd protect Sam and the comms room. By this point, I'd stopped even trying to argue. Humans have this thing where the more insane and suicidal a plan sounds, the more likely they are to call it necessary and do it anyway. But I'll admit, something about it stirred something in me. Something dark and ugly and quietly impressed. So when Core finally turned to me and barked, "Well, you coming?" I simply crossed my arms and said, "Of course. Someone has to make sure you don't completely destroy yourselves before the Hive even arrives." The preparations were swift and grim. Dr. Vorn sat in front of a camera, her blood-stained coat neatly folded, hair pulled back, face calm. The humans gathered around her silently as she recorded her final message. My name is Dr. Lisa Vorn, Chief Medical Officer of the Haven Colony Mission. What you're about to see is the truth about the Hive Swarm. They do not simply kill their victims, they preserve their consciousness. We remain aware while they remake us. I am volunteering for this, so you will all understand what awaits you if you don't act. She paused, stared directly into the camera, and added, "This is not just a human problem. This is a galactic one. If you do nothing today, tomorrow will be your people begging for it to stop." And then she stood, handed the tablet to Sam, and said, "Let's get this over with." We accompanied her to a small shuttle, which she would fly directly into the Hive fleet to ensure capture. As she strapped herself in, Core stood at the edge of the airlock and muttered, "This is insane." "Yes," she agreed. "And necessary." "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking just enough to notice. She smirked faintly. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until it works." And then the shuttle launched, straight into the jaws of death. The Hive accepted her instantly. A tractor beam reeled her in like fresh bait. Meanwhile, Sam was already broadcasting the signal, his fingers flying over the controls, voice steady despite the sweat dripping down his temple. "This is Sam Vorn broadcasting from Haven Station. What you're about to see is the truth of the Hive Swarm. Please share it with everyone." The station's klaxons blared. The Hive fleet was already advancing, no doubt trying to destroy the transmission before it could spread. Danny Foster limped into the comms room, rifle at the ready, and planted himself by the door. "They're coming," he growled. "Then we hold," Sam replied without looking up. What followed was difficult to watch. The shuttle's cameras kept rolling as Dr. Vorn was strapped to one of the Hive's hideous conversion tables. I'd seen these rooms before, but through the sterile lens of war reports. This was different. This was personal. The galaxy watched as the machines sliced through her clothing, restrained her limbs, injected glowing filaments into her spine. Watched as her eyes widened and her back arched in pain when the first metal tendrils burrowed under her skin. Watched as plates were fused to her skull, as her veins glowed green, as her voice, shaking but unbroken, narrated what was happening to her in real time. This is what they do. They keep you awake. They keep you here. You can't stop it, but you feel everything. The comms room went quiet. Even the humans, hardened killers who'd faced death a dozen times, flinched as her screams filled the speakers. Yet she never once begged them to stop. Then something unexpected happened. Galactic communication channels began to light up. One by one, Allied fleets signaled their intentions. The Andorran Armada, the Crystalline Confederacy, even the usually apathetic MYRK, all mobilizing, all heading for Haven. Sam's voice cracked as he read the reports aloud. "Sir, they're coming. Hundreds of ships, thousands, maybe. Everyone's coming." Jackson Core exhaled a long, shaky breath and muttered, "You did it, document. You really did it." But the Hive was already on us. Their ships swarmed the station like hornets, trying to silence the broadcast before it could finish. Danny Foster dropped 2 drones in the doorway before turning to Sam. "Keep transmitting, even if it kills you. Especially if it kills you." And the boy grinned through his terror and answered, "Wouldn't dream of stopping." So yes, if you told me a week ago that a single human doctor, a twitchy comms tech, and a half-burnt Marine would hold the line against the galaxy's worst nightmare just to make a point, I would have called you mad. But now I've learned better. These creatures don't fight because it's smart. They fight because they refuse not to. And God's help anyone who underestimates that. When you've seen enough wars, and I have, trust me, you start to think you've seen everything. Armies collapsing in terror. Empires trading morality for survival. Species tearing each other apart over crumbs, only to be digested whole by something bigger and hungrier than them. I thought I'd seen it all, but I hadn't seen humans yet. And now, watching them prepare for their final stand on Haven Station, I finally understood the truth. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting so the darkness would have to go through them first. The command deck of Haven was quiet. That alone should have been my first warning. Humans are never quiet unless they're about to do something catastrophic. Jackson Core stood at the viewport, arms behind his back, watching the Hive fleet settle into position just outside our weapons range. Hundreds of enemy ships, a wall of black chitin and steel bristling with weapons. Behind us, what was left of Haven Station and a dozen battered ships barely holding together. In front of us, oblivion. "They're waiting," Core said, almost conversationally. I tilted my head. Waiting for what? For us to break. Yes, of course. Logical. What wasn't logical was that none of them did. Dr. Lisa Vorn limped into the command deck next, still in her blood-streaked coat, still carrying her medical satchel like it was some kind of religious icon. Her hands shook, not from fear. Humans don't seem to have that kind of sense, but from sheer exhaustion. She hadn't stopped working since the last wave. 27 hours by my count. Treating humans. Treating my soldiers. Treating anyone who still drew breath. And still she kept going. Even when one of her assistants begged her to rest, she just shook her head and said, "Too many people still need me." I stared at her and finally said, "Why?" She blinked at me, genuinely confused. "Why what? Why help strangers? Even enemies? Even when you're dying yourself?" She smiled faintly. "Because they're not strangers once you help them." And then she limped away before I could come up with a response. Down in the armory, Bran Tuck, who I thought had died in the last assault, but no. Here he was checking weapons with one arm bandaged to his chest and a plasma burn still sizzling across his back. "How many rounds do you have left?" I asked. "Enough to piss them off real good," he replied with a grin. "And when you run out?" He gestured at a pile of knives, pipes, and what looked suspiciously like a sharpened table leg. "Then we get creative." I shook my head in disbelief. "Rocks, knives, against plasma. You're all insane." Tuck barked a laugh. "You say that like it's news." And then there was Danny Foster. The boy, because I refused to believe he was older than a hatchling, was helping evacuate the last of the civilians into pods. His face was still burned from the last skirmish. Half his uniform shredded, but he carried a little girl in one arm while ushering an elderly woman into a pod with the other. As the door sealed, the girl looked up at him with big, tear-filled eyes and asked, "Are you coming too?" Danny smiled through blood-stained teeth and said, "No, sweetheart. Someone's got to stay and keep you safe. But, will I see you again?" Danny's smile never faltered, even though I saw something break behind his eyes. "Maybe, if we're very lucky." And then he closed the pod door, patted it twice, and turned back to face the darkness. By now the Hive was advancing. They came slowly, methodically, savoring the inevitable. You could feel it in the air, the hum of their engines, the scrape of claws against metal, the quiet certainty of predators closing in for the kill. Kor stood at the viewport and spoke without turning around. "You don't have to stay, Commander." I snorted. "And miss the grand finale?" "Never." He actually chuckled at that. "Fair enough." The station rocked as the first wave hit. Hive ships swarmed like insects, slamming into our shields, tearing into our outer decks. Every corridor became a battlefield. In Docking Bay 3, I found myself shoulder to shoulder with Bran Tuck and Danny Foster, fending off a horde of drones that just kept coming. They moved like one organism. Perfect coordination. No hesitation. No fear. And yet, for all their power, for all their precision, they couldn't quite match the humans. Because humans do feel fear, and they fight anyway. They fought with knives when the guns ran dry, with pipes when the knives broke, with their bare hands when nothing else was left. One Marine even headbutted a drone hard enough to dent its chassis before collapsing in a heap. When I asked him why later, he grinned through a mouthful of broken teeth and said, "Felt like the thing had it coming." In the medical bay, Lisa Vorn worked through the chaos, her coat so soaked with blood it was hard to tell where her hands ended and the gore began. When she finally stumbled and fell, one of her assistants tried to pull her away. "You've done enough, doctor. You can stop." She glared at them through half-closed eyes. "I'll stop when everyone else does." And then she dragged herself back to her feet and kept going. By the time the final push came, there was almost nothing left of Haven Station. Half the walls were open to the void. Fires raged in every corner. The humans still standing were covered in ash and blood, their weapons little more than scraps of metal and fury. The Hive began to breach the command deck. Kor glanced at me and smirked. "Well, Commander, ready to die?" I drew my blade and grinned back at him. "About damn time." We held. I don't know how long. Time blurs when you're buried in a sea of teeth and claws and screaming. But somehow, impossibly, we held. And then, just when it seemed we couldn't hold another second, when the Hive was almost on top of the last civilian pods, something extraordinary happened. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of Allied ships began dropping out of warp above us. The Andoran Armada, the Crystalline Confederacy, the MYRK, the entire damn galaxy, finally waking up and coming to fight. Hive ships peeled away, confused, overwhelmed. And we, what was left of U.S., stood there in the wreckage of Haven Station, bloodied and broken but alive. Later, when the smoke cleared and the wounded were being carried away, I found Danny Foster slumped against a bulkhead, cradling that little girl's drawing in his hands. I crouched next to him and asked quietly, "Why? Why keep fighting, even when you knew you couldn't win?" He looked up at me, smiling through swollen lips. "Because somebody had to stand here, between them and the dark. And that was it, wasn't it? Humans don't fight because they're strong. They fight because they can't bear not to. Because to them, standing in the way of the dark, even if it kills them, is better than letting it swallow the people they love. And that, I finally understood, is what makes them dangerous. Not their weapons, not their ships, not even their stubbornness, but their willingness to stand, especially when they know they're going to fall. So yes, if you ask me now, after all this, what I learned about humans, it's simple. They are what happens when you give fear a backbone. And gods help the galaxy if they ever stop being afraid.